Part 1 started in the darkness before dawn and ended with a wild, orgiastic outburst at the end of the day. Now it is nighttime again. The curtain to the stage is down, and according to Robert Kraft, the house lights were to have been extinguished so that Part 2 could begin in darkness. The music of the introduction to Part 2 is night music, dark, slow, and mysterious. We are back in the feminized pastoral mode of the introduction to Part 1, and a long expressive voyage is set to begin again, one that will take us from pastoral through military and religious modes to the shattering dance of death with which the ballet concludes. In early formulations, before the scenario had taken a definitive shape, Stravinsky described Part 2 as the secret night games of the girls on the sacred hill. The conjunction of female and nighttime is significant, as is the idea that the girls' night games are secret. Inwardness, like the female and the nocturnal, is an attribute of the pastoral expressive mode, in contrast to the outwardness of the military mode. This scene is in two sections with the retrospective coda. The first section features what will become the main melody in the subsequent scene, the mystic circle of the young women. The tune emerges slowly from the mist and is fragmented, transposed, and transformed along the way. The second section features a sinuous two-part counterpoint, scored initially for two trumpets. The scene concludes with a coda that first recalls the mystic circle tune and then the sinuous counterpoint. A return to the opening music at the end of the scene is one of the formal markers of the pastoral expressive mode. Although most recent choreographies of the rite include onstage dance for the introduction to Part 2, the audience at the premiere in 1913 saw an empty stage decorated with a painting by Nicholas Roerich, described by Benoit as a sacred hill amid enchanted rocks. In the Hodson-Nijinsky reconstruction, the audience contemplates the forthcoming action in Roerich's painting of an isolated maiden approached by ancestors in animal skins. It is the dead of night, and the world is mostly still. The mystic circle melody gradually emerges from a single ghostly high A and is transposed and transformed. The tune is surrounded by a whispering wreath of minor triads, like the rustling of leaves. In the first block, the high A in the first oboe will later turn out to be the first note of a melody that dominates both the introduction to Part 2 and the mystic circle. Beneath this incipient mystic circle melody, we hear an oscillation of two minor triads moving in eighth notes and a slower alternation of two chords beneath. Bass, the main harmonic strand has a D minor triad supporting the main melodic tone, A, in a slow alternation with E7, which acts as its upper neighbor. The roots of the two chords are a major second apart, and that becomes the main motivic and constructive interval of the scene, as we will see. In the middle strand, D sharp minor and C sharp minor oscillate, 6 pairs of chords related at T2. Their roots are a semitone above and a semitone below the prevailing D minor harmony, creating a harmonic environment that is extremely cloudy, murky, and mysterious. At the conclusion of the block, we find a single pair of minor triads related to T6, A sharp minor and E minor, coincident with E7 in the lower strand. This two-chord progression marks the end of the block. Block 2 is a continuation of Block 1. The high A is still all we have of a melody, and it is accompanied by two harmonic strands. In the lower strand, D minor again alternates with E7. In the upper strand, E flat minor and C sharp minor alternate, ending with the same B flat minor, E minor pair that concluded the first block. In block 3, the harmony layer continues from the previous two blocks. The melodic high A remains too, but now finally begins to move. Eventually, it will take shape as the principal melody for both the introduction and the mystic circle, the following scene. In the harmony layer, D minor is sustained throughout, as in the previous two blocks. Above it, the strand of triads moving in steady eighth notes has diversified a bit from its original alternation of C sharp minor and D sharp minor. A sharp minor and E minor recur from previous blocks. E sharp minor is new and persistent. A minor is new and occurs only once. D sharp minor is the principal triad, and it is decorated with upper E sharp and lower C sharp neighboring triads. The melody mostly wanders around the central D sharp minor, a murky wash of minor triads. Above this triadic wash, a melody is gradually unveiled, moving within a D-A frame, and that's consonant with the D minor harmony. First, the A is decorated twice with a lower neighbor G before leaping down to D. In the next block, the full melody will take shape. The neighboring motion in the melody echoes the whole step oscillation in the harmony, as well as the motion from D minor to E7 from blocks 1 and 2. Whole tone stutters in all three strands. In block 4, above the harmonic strand repeated from block 1, with motion from D minor to E7, amid a wash of parallel minor triads, the main melody takes its definitive form. The mystic circle melody moves within a D-A frame, filled as D-E-G-A. By virtue of its D-A frame, this melody is linked to previous melodies within the same frame, especially the one I have been calling the abduction fanfare number 2, which occurs both in the ritual of abduction and in the ritual of the two rival tribes. But despite the shared frame, the expressive mode has utterly changed from militaristic male sexual violence to feminized night music. Block 5 is a continuation of the previous blocks, with the melody centered on A and two strands in the harmony layer, one moving quickly and one moving slowly. The melody still moves within its DA frame, but now it has lost its distinctive shape. It has been liquidated into a simple stepwise descent through the frame, A, G, F sharp, E, D. At the same time, the progression of triads in the bass elaborates a bass line that ascends through the same span, D, E, F sharp, G, A. Through this large-scale voice exchange, the harmonies progress just as they did in Block 1, from D minor to E7. Block 6 is basically a repeat of Block 4, transposed up a major third. We focus on the transposition of the melody and note that its transposition creates another parallel with the Abduction Fanfare number 2 melody as it appeared in the ritual of the two rival tribes. The parallelism between the treatment of these two themes serves to underscore their different expressive impact from military mode to nocturnal pastoral. In a more distant way in the chronology of the ballet, but a closer way in terms of expressive impact, this transposed mystic circle melody links closely to the young women's melody from Augurs of Spring. The transposition at T4 affects the bass also. It moved from D to E, now it moves from F sharp to G sharp, tracing a whole tone tetrachord, D, E, F sharp, G sharp. The two statements of the melody also trace a whole tone tetrachord, G, A, B, C sharp, belonging to the other whole tone collection. Whole tone designs like this are as common in Part 2 as similar designs involving minor thirds were in Part 1. They serve to bind together the discrete blocks into larger continuities. Previously, the melody was heard in octaves played by flutes and violin harmonics. In Block 7, the melody starts to attract planing accompaniment even as it undergoes further transposition. The beginning and end of the melody suggest one level of transposition, but only the melody's highest two notes are present. The middle of the melody suggests a different level of transposition, a semitone higher than it should be, but only the melody's lowest three notes are present. The melodic compression produces a whole tone segment, F flat, G flat, A flat, B flat, at the junction between the two transpositions. The planing accompaniment involves chords that are either dominant seventh chords or major triads with a distractor or semitone above the root. More simply, they are all major triads with an added note, either a major second below the root for the dominant seventh chords, or a minor second above the root for the others. The roots of the triads are the melody notes, and the dissonant distractor is generally in the bass. The harmony layer consists of nothing but a stuttering alternation of F and G flat, arranged as an 11-note palindrome and a final 4-note flourish. It gives a hint of a new class of melodies based on small chromatic cells. We will hear an important such melody in the very next block. Eight provides a brief premonition of what will be the main tune in the second section of the scene, spliced between two closely related blocks belonging to the first section. This is a distinctive little duet for two trumpets, a bit of fourth species-like two-part counterpoint. I will have more to say about its affective qualities when we get to the second section of the scene, which this melody dominates. This sinuous counterpoint does not conform to any of the four principal melodic types. Rather, it moves within a whole tone, which it divides into two semitones. It simultaneously points back to the opening of the ballet, where we heard our first premonition of the old woman's tune, and ahead to the last scene, the sacrificial dance's fatality motive. Within the introduction to Part 2, both parts of the sinuous two-part counterpoint are part of a network of whole tones, moving within whole tone 0. Block 9 is a modified repeat of Block 7, after the brief premonitory intrusion of Block 8. In this final block of the first section, we hear two somewhat fragmentary anticipations of the mystic circle melody which dominates the following scene. The opening chord progression repeats the final chords of Block 7 with the addition of a sustained G flat. Its highest notes continue to hint at the mystic circle melody located at E flat F, A flat, B flat. The two-note extract attracts its usual planing accompaniment. The melody notes are the roots of triads, which may take on sevenths and other added notes. That ascending whole tone is also a premonition of the agitated build-up to the selection of the chosen one at the end of Mystic Circle. Kraft refers to it as a fatal toxin. Until now, the references to the Mystic Circle melody have all been in its first portion. Here, at the end of the first section of the introduction, we hear for the first time a brief anticipation of the second portion of the melody. In its definitive shape at the beginning of the next scene, The second portion lies within the same 0257 frame as the first. Here, however, it is compressed into a whole tone fragment, 0246. It thus participates in the unfolding whole tone network that pervades this scene. Indeed, this compressed statement of the mystic circle melody both completes the melody by providing its hitherto missing second portion and extends the major seconds of its upper strand into a complete whole tone scale, ending where it began. The planing accompaniment consists of major and minor triads, usually with a dissonant distractor added, either a chordal seventh or a semitone above the root. The melody note is no longer consistently the triad root, and the dissonant distractor is no longer exclusively in the bass. But notice the harmonization of the two high points, G flat and G, as G flat major with a dissonant G in the bass, and G major with a dissonant A flat in the bass. After a premonition in Block 8, the sinuous two-part counterpoint comes to dominate the texture. Its top voice moves within a whole tone, divided into two semitones, the first such melody in the ballet, but not the last. The major second as a motive, as a melodic frame, and, when a unit of cyclic transposition, as a source of linear continuity, plays the same role in Part 2 of the ballet that the minor third did in Part 1. This block contains 6 statements of the two-part counterpoint, 2 of them filling the initial lower voice interval with a passing tone. The upper voice moves within a narrow B-flat C frame, while both parts stay mostly within whole tone 0. The melody has a sinuous and, in its chromaticism, a slightly exotic quality. It is related to melodies in ritual action in that way. It has something of the dark, nocturnal, feminine affect of the entire introduction. The tritone frame of the lower melody adds to its dark, exotic quality. The lower voice of the two-part counterpoint might also be interpreted in a somewhat different way as filling in the Dorian tetrachord F G A flat B flat with E as lower neighbor. We have heard this tetrachord, including with a lower neighbor, many times before. In this view, the lower voice is associated with earlier male-oriented melodies, even as the upper melody has a distinctly female valence. In the harmonic layer, there are two coordinated strands, an oscillation of two three-note chords and an associated oscillation of two dyads within a four-note bass ostinato. The stuttering oscillation holds the music motionless. In block 11, the sinuous two-part counterpoint and the ostinatos continue from the previous block, now with added layers. To the continuing two-part counterpoint and oscillating ostinatos, a new harmonic layer is added, centered on C7, C, E, G, B flat. This layer takes the form of rapid arpeggios, which occur at fairly regular intervals punctuating the block. These amplify the note C, the melodic arrival note of the sinuous counterpoint. The C7 arpeggios and the bass ostinato are positioned regularly and divide the block into 4 units of 9 beats. The harmony layer, with its oscillation of T2 related chords, is also positioned regularly within the 9-measure units. These harmonies emphasize first B flat and then C, in keeping with the melodic motion in the upper voice of the sinuous two-part counterpoint, which is heard 4 times in the block in unpredictable locations. The coda is in 2 parts, both involving fragmentary reminiscences, first of the mystic circle melody, and then, as the curtain goes up, 4 statements of the sinuous two-part counterpoint. The score tells us that it is now night, but we have in fact been in darkness since the beginning of the scene, and indeed the whole of part 2 takes place during the night. In block 12, the C major chord continues from the previous block. Beneath it, we hear 2 statements of the mystic circle melody at a new level of transposition and with a planing accompaniment. In the scene as a whole, the first and last statements of the mystic circle melody are connected at T2, composing out at this high level the major seconds within the melody itself. At this level of transposition, the upper whole tone of the melody extends the long chain of whole tones, reaching back to the beginning of the scene. Along the way, the intervallic frame of the melody gets compressed and expanded. In that way, the larger T2 move is achieved in stages as the whole tone dyads of the melody move with some degree of independence. The scene concludes in the 13th block with final statements of the sinuous two-part counterpoint, now transposed to T7. If this transpositional pattern were to continue, it would take us to the whole tone CD, filled in with C sharp. We'll bear that in mind because, as it turns out, CD becomes a primary locus of activity later on in the sacrificial dance. At that level, with FG in the upper voice, this material joins in the whole tone network described by the Mystic Circle tune, thus effecting a reconciliation of the two contrasting ideas in this scene, the Mystic Circle tune and the sinuous two-part counterpoint. The first harmony of the block is oriented toward E flat, B flat. The last harmony is oriented toward B F sharp. That motion recalls an earlier transposition of the Mystic Circle tune at T4, and the arrival on B harmony anticipates the principal harmony of the Mystic Circle scene, which is about to begin.